Okay, so let's unpack this. When you open the Bible to Genesis, most people just assume they're reading one single, seamless creation story.
A single narrative, exactly.
But if you actually dive into the sources, the ancient texts, the culture, all the scholarship, you realize Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are actually two fundamentally distinct narratives.
They really are. They've been woven together, but they started separately.
Right.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We want to move past this idea of Genesis as a single document and explore it as, well, a stack of traditions.
A stack of traditions, I like that.
We're looking at Genesis 1.1 all the way through chapter 3, but understanding it in its context, in the historical pressure cooker of the ancient Near East.
Which was a world just saturated with creation myths.
Saturated, especially from places like Babylon. So we really have to unpack how Genesis served as a deliberate counter-narrative to its powerful neighbors.
And then look at the contradictions inside the text itself.
Yes, and see what the unique messages of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 tell you about the nature of God and humanity. It's fascinating.
So we're going to look at the radical shift to monotheism, the parallels and the intentional differences between Genesis 1 and the Babylonian epic, the Enuma Elish.
And crucially, the internal theological shifts you see when you read Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 as the separate texts they once were.
Let's start at the beginning, literally. Scholars call the first 7 Hebrew words of Genesis 1.1, "In the beginning, Yahweh created the heavens and the earth." They call this the Hebrew Revolution. That seems like, I don't know, a really extreme term for an opening sentence. What makes those words so radical?
To get the magnitude, you have to place yourself in the polytheistic context of the ancient world. For thousands of years, the standard belief system had one simple idea at its core.
Which was?
Nature was supreme. Nature was eternal. In that view, nature is the fundamental reality that existed first, and often nature itself creates the gods.
You see that everywhere, right? The Greek pantheon, for example.
Precisely. Whether you're looking at Greek or Mesopotamian gods, the deities are always subject to nature, to destiny. They have, human-like needs, rivalries, passions.
They rise and fall.
They rise and fall, but nature, the raw, physical cosmos, that remains the ultimate unchallenged power. Chaos is always lurking, waiting to swallow everything up.
And Genesis just throws the ultimate wrench in that system.
It does, permanently. Genesis says that God is supreme, needs no explanation, and wills nature into being. He's not part of nature, he stands completely outside of it.
So the Great Divide isn't between nature and everything else.
Yeah. The Great Divide is now between the creator of the world and everything he created. That immediate, unchallenged supremacy is the foundation for everything else that follows. It allows the text to establish the authority to dictate a universal moral code.
A moral code for all of humanity.
Regardless of tribe or nation, it's a total reordering of reality.
And that reordering is most powerfully understood when we hold Genesis 1 up against, well, the dominant creation story at the time.
The Babylonian epic, the Enuma Elish.
Exactly.
Yeah, the Enuma Elish is it's an essential comparison point. You have to understand it. This was a massive literary and cultural force.
So not just some obscure text.
Not at all. It's an Akkadian epic poem. It was inscribed on 7 clay tablets dating back, and this is incredible, possibly as far as 1900 BCE.
And it wasn't just a story, it was performed, right?
It was a ritual text recited every single year during the New Year festival in Babylon to, renew the city and its relationship with its main god, Marduk.
And the creation narrative it tells is one of cosmic violence.
Complete violence. Creation doesn't come from an orderly word. It comes from a civil war among the gods. Marduk only becomes the supreme ruler after he defeats this monstrous primordial goddess,
Tiamat,
who represented saltwater chaos. And the world is literally created when Marduk splits her corpse in 2. He uses half to form the heavens and the other half for the earth.
So what happens to humanity in that story? Where do we come from?
Humanity exists for purely utilitarian purposes. We are created from the blood of Tiamat's consort, Kingu, for one reason, to serve the gods as laborers, as slaves.
To do the hard work.
To relieve the deities of mundane physical work. That's it.
Okay, now this is where the scholarly analysis gets really insightful, because despite that huge theological gap, a God of peace versus a world born from war, Genesis 1 seems intentionally formatted to counter the Enuma Elish.
Absolutely. The consensus is that it's a deliberate polemic, a response.
And you see these parallels that suggest the author of Genesis knew the Babylonian text well.
Oh, for sure. You find these compelling structural similarities. Both narratives start with a state of chaos. Both even share a word for that deep primal disorder.
Which is...
The Hebrew Tiham is a cognate. It's related to the Akkadian Tiamat.
Wow, okay.
And they also share a remarkably similar creation sequence. You get light, then the sky, dry land, celestial bodies, animals, and finally humans. And both stories conclude with a divine rest.
It's almost as if the Hebrew author took the framework of the dominant myth of his world and just deliberately stripped out all the polytheism and violence.
And replace it with the peaceful authority of one God.
Exactly.
The differences define the Hebrew worldview.
So let's look at those. First, theology.
Monotheistic. A single sovereign God creates just by speaking. That's Genesis. Versus the bloody polytheistic battle in the Enuma Elish.
And the method of creation.
Genesis 1 is, well, it's aggressively demythologized. It avoids any words that might accidentally give power to other gods. For instance, it doesn't name the sun Shemesh.
Which was a name for a sun god.
Right, it just calls it the greater light. This insistence on order emphasizes that God isn't struggling against chaos, he's simply ordering it.
And the difference in the status of humanity is, it's world-changing.
That's the ultimate ethical statement. The Enuma Elish is hierarchical humans are slaves born from violence. Genesis 1 is radically egalitarian. Humans, male and female equally, are created in God's image and likeness. They are not slaves. They are stewards. They are delegated representatives given dominion over the earth.
And that idea, being a steward, not a slave, that's the single most powerful ethical inheritance of this text.
It absolutely is. It undermined the ideological foundation of virtually every empire in the region, which were all built on conquest and forced labor.
But the complexity doesn't stop there, because now we have to turn our attention inward to the conflict between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2.
Right.
As we mentioned, these are two separate traditions. Scholars call them the priestly source, or P, and the Yahwist, or J, source. They were redacted together, and you can almost see the seam right at Genesis 2.4.
You can. And if you try to force them into a single literal timeline, you actually miss the profound theological richness of each original account.
When you stop trying to harmonize them?
And just read them on their own terms, the differences just jump out at you. They disagree on everything. The name of the deity, the initial state of the world, the order of events.
Okay, let's break down the most striking difference first. The portrayal of God. How do the P and J sources see God?
So in Genesis 1, the priestly source consistently uses the generic Hebrew term Elohim God. This God is majestic, remote, transcendent. He creates solely through speech.
Just by command.
Just by command. The verb used is bara, which means to create out of nothing or to create in a sovereign way. And significantly, this God never physically interacts with the creation.
It's creation by royal decree. But the God of Genesis 2 is completely hands-on.
Absolutely. The Yahweh source uses the compound name YHWH Elohim, the Lord God. And this God is deeply anthropomorphic, meaning he has human-like attributes.
He's not just speaking things into existence.
No, he molds man from the dust of the earth like a potter. The verb here is yatsar, which means to fabricate or to form. He breathes life, he plants a garden, he builds a woman from a rib, and he walks and talks in that garden.
So in one story, creation is about wisdom and power, separated by speech. In the other, it's about intimacy and fabrication, separated only by touch. That's a huge theological divergence.
It is. It presents the listener with a complex, two-sided view of the divine. God is both a transcendent king and an immanent personal companion.
And then there's the initial geography. The starting point for creation is the opposite in each story.
It is. Genesis 1 starts with the earth inundated with water. These deep waters that God has to tame and separate to reveal dry land.
Which reflects a Mesopotamian worldview.
Exactly, a fertile river delta where water management is everything. The earth is naturally fecund.
But in Genesis 2, there's no water at all.
None. Genesis 2 begins with a dry, barren wilderness. It can't support any life until water emerges from underground springs or mist. And this reflects the dry, often arid landscape of Canaan. The authors are literally projecting their own geographic realities onto the origin story.
Which brings us to the chronological contradiction. This is the part that's often most confusing for people reading the text literally for the first time.
The orders are irreconcilable if you insist on reading them as a single timeline. Genesis 1 gives us that famous, orderly sequence over 6 days. Light, sky, land and plants, celestial bodies, sea and air creatures.
And then land animals and humans created at the same time on day 6.
Right, and Genesis 2 completely changes that order.
Drastically.
Yeah. The man, Hadam, is formed first from the ground, Hadama. Then plants are put in the garden specifically for him. Then the animals are molded from the ground because God sees the man as alone.
So animals are created to be his companions.
Right, and finally the woman, Isha, is built from the man's rib. So plants and animals are created after the man, which is the exact opposite of the Genesis 1 order.
So if ancient readers didn't have our modern source criticism to explain this,
Right, which they obviously didn't.
how do scholars think they reconciled such profound differences?
That's a fascinating question. I think it reveals the purpose of the text. They weren't reading it as a scientific timeline. They were reading it for theological meaning.
The why, not the how.
Exactly. The priority wasn't reconciling the chronology, but grasping the comprehensive truth that God is the sole creator and that humanity is central to his purpose. Genesis 1 stresses God's majesty. Genesis 2 stresses his relationship with us. They focus on the complementary message, not the contradictory details.
And that focus on the message is driven home by these linguistic puns that are unique to Genesis 2. They offer a completely different definition of humanity than the image of God idea in Genesis 1.
The Yahweh's author was a master of wordplay. The man, Adam, is molded from the Adamah, the ground.
So it's a pun.
A very intentional one. It immediately ties humanity to the earth and to agricultural labor. His purpose is literally connected to the dirt from which he came.
And the relationship between man and woman is also defined by wordplay.
Precisely. The woman, Isha, is built from the man, Ish. This serves as the origin story, the etiological tale for married. It defines them as one flesh because that's literally how they began.
So while Genesis 1 defines humans by their equality in the divine image,
Genesis 2 defines them by their relationships, man to the earth and woman to man.
which gives us two very powerful, deep messages. One about universal worth and delegation, and another about intimacy and connection.
Exactly.
Now, let's pivot back to Genesis 1 and focus on the architectural backbone of that account, the 7-day pattern. The sources make it clear the structure is theological, not just chronological. It's about covenant.
The structure is beautifully symmetric. It shows God's wisdom. Days 1 through 3 address formlessness by establishing and separating the cosmic realms, light from dark, waters above from waters below, and water from dry land.
Okay, so it's creating the spaces first.
Creating the spaces. Then days 4 through 6 address emptiness by filling those realms. The sun and moon fill the light and dark, birds and fish fill the air and water, and animals and human fill the land.
And then day 7 breaks the entire pattern.
It's the climax. Days 1 through 6 end with the phrase, "There was evening and there was morning." Day 7 doesn't. It represents divine rest, Shabbat, and it knows no end.
And this is where the covenant idea is structurally embedded.
It is. The linguistic root for the number 7, Sheba, is inextricably linked to the word for oath, or for swearing a covenant.
So by structuring creation in 7 days, the author's making a profound statement.
He is stating that God is making a covenant with his creation from the very foundation. Creation isn't just an act of engineering, it's an act of relationship. God intends for man and woman to be family, not just objects he manufactured.
This brings us directly to the ethical and spiritual implications of day 7, the Sabbath. It's not just some arbitrary rule, it's built into the rhythm of existence itself.
It's an imitation of the divine. Because God rested, Shabbat, humans, created in his image, must also rest. The Sabbath commandment demands intentional self-restraint.
And trust.
And a radical economic trust in God to provide. It is a refusal to become enslaved to endless production and ambition, what one source calls the yoke of greed.
And the genius of the idea is that it applies not just to people, but to the entire created world.
That's the holistic view. The concept extends to the sabbatical year, where the land itself has to lie fallow and regenerate. This enforces the theological claim that matter matters to God. Bodies matter, soil matters, time matters.
The creation narrative demands that you stop.
You have to stop and acknowledge that creation is good, but it is not God.
Before we move on, let's just quickly circle back to the element of life itself. We noted that Genesis 2 describes God breathing life into the man.
Yes, and that connects to the Holy Spirit, which is present across both narratives. The Hebrew word is ruach, which means breath, wind, or spirit.
So it's there in both stories.
It's active in Genesis 1.2, hovering over the waters, and it's the breath that fills the lungs in Genesis 2.7. It's the life-giving force, the sustaining energy that connects all of creation. It's a recurring theme that life, fundamentally, comes from the breath of God.
So what does this all mean for us? The key takeaway seems to be that Genesis is not a monolithic, literal account trying to compete with modern science.
Not at all.
It is a brilliant, layered, and revolutionary theological text. It challenges the violent polytheistic myths of its time by providing a vision of God's wisdom, the goodness of creation, and, well, our calling.
Our calling to be both image bearer and responsible steward.
Yes, it's a huge vision.
And that theological message really culminates in the gift of intentionality, especially around rest. It's a refusal to let the calendar enslave us. I love this one Jewish legend that beautifully captures the binding nature of the Sabbath, regardless of our choice.
Okay.
It tells of a necromancer who could call his dead father from the grave every day of the week except for the Sabbath. When he asked why, the father responded, "Anyone among you, the living, who does not keep the Sabbath of his own free will must keep it here in spite of himself. Every day of the week we endure judgment, but on the Sabbath we rest."
Wow. That makes the Sabbath sound not like a restriction, but a profound necessity. The challenge for us isn't just reading this complex, multi-layered text, but truly living the rest it demands. Acknowledging the Sabbath as a gift, a word of grace to a culture that's just obsessed with achieving more. It's a rhythm that sustains not just us, but the earth we're called to steward.